So when I was little, I have three siblings. They're all significantly older than me, and I remind them of that frequently. Um, but I think one of them's 10 years older, one's 9 years older, and I think one's like 7 years older. So I was the youngest by quite a ways. And I remember on Saturday nights when I was a kid, growing up in Northwest Iowa, my parents would go out and like play cards with a bunch of friends on Saturday night. And I was probably like 7, 8, 9 years old, and my siblings were kind of supposed to watch me, but sometimes they got a better offer. So they knew as long as like they were home before mom and dad got home, they were going to be fine because I was physically threatened if I was going to tell on them and all that sort of stuff. And usually it wasn't a problem at all. I grew up in a really small town, but sometimes, I'm guessing I was 8 or 9 years old. I would kind of like get scared, be in this big old house all by yourself. And the house was 100 years old at the time. It's really 100 and probably 25, 130 years old now. Now you can do your math in your head and figure out how old I am. But there was this one really cool room, and it was like where our family always hung out, and it was just a little room, and there was a big TV. It was 19 inches. Can y'all imagine like that type of luxury, having a 19-inch color TV? Like, we had arrived as a family when we got that thing, and it had this little dial on it, and I was always the little one, so I'd have, hey, we turned to NBC, so you turned to Channel 4, and we had 4 channels we watched in there. But my favorite part of that room wasn't the room itself. It was the closet that was right next to that room. It was below the staircase, so it was like, full height in the front, but then it would go down in the back. And, some of those nights I would go into that little hiding place. Like, I'd take my books and a flashlight, like the Chronicles of Narnia or Lake Wobegon Days or whatever I was reading, and I would just lock myself in that little room, and I was totally safe. And then sometimes, not even on Saturday nights, if just things were too loud and too noisy, that was just my little room. Like, it was one of those closets like you never use. You just like store a bunch of stuff in there. Like back in the day, we used to have what was called a dress coat. Like, you had a coat that you would wear like to a nice occasion. We'd put some of that stuff in there. There's a vacuum cleaner in there, and then there's my little spot where I'd just like sit and I'd read these books, and I'd lock the door, and I'd be totally safe. Now, isolation, being alone, that was my fear as a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid. Now, I have replaced those fears with other fears, just like many of you have. We all have fears. They were one thing when we were a kid, and now as an adult, they're different things. So Seinfeld, he says the second biggest fear is death. The biggest fear is public speaking. That means most people would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. So we have those fears, death, public speaking. I think one would be like public failure. That's a huge fear. Unemployment is a fear. My fear is I just hate heights. Like, once I get like more than like 6 inches off the ground, I get afraid. Some of us might have fears that we never meet anybody, have a significant other to share life with. Some of us have fears we won't have a baby. Some of us have fears that our babies won't like us. We fear that we are abandoned. Many of us fear that we won't be healthy again like we once were. It just runs the gauntlet. Now, if you struggle with fear, if you struggle with anxiety, if you struggle with worry, I want you to hear this. Like, let's just start off here as the foundation. You are not alone. So if I've talked about any of those things and there's some anxiety or worry or fear that's present in your life, you're not alone. Like, we all have these things. The weak and the strong, they both deal with anxiety. The rich and the poor, they both deal with fear. The young and the old, they both deal with worry. Those who have it all together and those who don't have it all together, fear and anxiety and worry are part of your life. Now, most of us will have one thing that brings us anxiety in life. And what we do is, when that anxiety, when that fear, when that worry comes, we run to our hiding place. Now, in the Bible, in the Gospel of John, chapter 20, we find that the disciples of Jesus are in their hiding place. So what happened here, I'm just going to set the stage. Jesus died a week before this. This right there is, that was a huge event for all of them. Now, what they did is they went to their hiding place. It was called the upper room. And we're going to read what happens there. So in verse 19 of John chapter 20, that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. All right, so they locked their door. They were afraid of the Jewish leaders. I'm going to tell you why in a second. Suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them, and the first thing he said to these men who were afraid is, "Peace be with you." As he spoke, he showed them the wounds on his hands and his side, so they knew for sure it was him. Then they were filled with joy because they saw the Lord. And again, Jesus rarely repeated himself. He did it 3 or 4 times, and this is one of them. Again, he said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." All right, so let's look at this text. There's a lot in there. So these guys were afraid, and why were they afraid? They're not afraid because Jesus died. They knew that was coming. They're not afraid because Jesus rose from the dead. I mean, they had seen him raise Lazarus from the dead. They knew, they probably expected this one. No, the reason that they were afraid is because the Roman authorities knew that this man should be in his tomb. And if this man wasn't in his tomb, somebody would have taken him out of his tomb, and they would have known that it was his buddies that did this. So these guys were basically in hiding. This was their hiding place. They were hiding from the Roman authorities because they knew that their days would be numbered as well if the Roman authorities ever got their hands on them. So they're in the upper room. Their doors are locked. Now, the next part of this, it said all of a sudden Jesus just appears to them. So here's what Jesus did. Jesus would have just walked right through the wall. Now you're thinking, that couldn't happen. Well, no, Jesus, just a week earlier, he walked through this big empty tomb thing and moved this great big rock. And, this is just a warm-up act for, this is nothing, walking through these walls and seeing these people. Now, Jesus, the first thing he says, the first thing that Jesus says to the men who are afraid, so everyone here with fear, everyone here with anxiety, everybody here with worry, here's what Jesus says. Jesus says, "Peace be with you." You say, I don't know what you're going through specifically. I can guess generally what one of the 5 or 6 issues might be. I don't know what keeps you up at night specifically. I don't know what causes you the most stress in your life. But I do know what you need. And it's the thing that Jesus gives, and that's peace. So for all of us who are anxious, all of us who are fearful, all of us who experience worry, Jesus says, "Peace be with you." He didn't just say it once, he said it twice because he wanted us to hear it. And then, here's what happens. Jesus, he walks through the walls of their fear. And they had plenty of fear because they knew the authorities were looking for them. And then Jesus walks through the walls of their shame. And, they had shame because they really let Jesus down. There was enough anxiety and there was enough shame in the room, and Jesus just walked through those walls. In the midst of their fear, in the midst of their time of need, Jesus, he knows that it is peace that they need, so it's peace that he gives them. And then, at the end, there's this little section, and it says, "As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." Now, we can't overlook this part. Jesus was sent by God to serve and love the people. Here now, Jesus is sending the anxious and shameful people to go change the world. Now, even though they are full of fear, Jesus is going to use them. Even though shame exists and guilt exists in their life, Jesus is going to use them. He knows that the best for them, the best days are still ahead. But here's the thing. Jesus is saying you can't do it in this room. You can't do it behind this locked wall in this locked room, behind this locked door, behind these 4 walls. My purpose, my plan, my dream, my vision for you does not include sitting in this room in your hiding place forever. Like eventually you need to unlock this door and go out into the broken and needy world that I am sending you to and love them as I have loved you. He says, I believe in you. You can face these fears head on. Now, do you believe that? You see, I believe it, and I think you believe it too. Now, Jesus, he knows that fear. Now, just think about this in your life. Like, what are you afraid of? What makes you anxious? What do you worry about? Jesus knows that these things are like a crippling criminal. These things are like this relentless thief that is trying to steal the life that God has given to us. Fear will erode our faith. Anxiety will take away our freedom. It runs away with our hope. It makes us obsess and a focus on our own limitations. It keeps us from taking risk. It prevents us from fully trusting God. Now, even if you haven't heard any of that stuff, I want to tell you probably what I think is going to be the most devastating thing that fear and anxiety and worry will do to us. What fear and anxiety and worry will do to us is they're going to prevent us from living right here in the moment, in the present. Because fear and anxiety and worry are always going to project themselves into the future. When you're worried about tomorrow, you cannot fully live today. When we're anxious about what our retirement looks like, and we're stressed out over that, we're missing that moment that God has given us right now. Now, Jesus knew that fear was going to be deadly to us. There's 125 times in the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, that Jesus gives us imperatives where he tells us to do things or not to do things. Now, 21 of those times, it relates directly to fear, where Jesus says, have courage, take heart, don't be afraid. Now, the next most common theme is love, and that appears 8 times. So Jesus talked about fear more than he talked about anything else as far as his imperatives go. Now, Jesus, he took our fears very seriously. He knew we had struggled with fear, and we're going to look at the rest of the morning, like how is it then that we combat fear? Okay, so the way that we combat fear, it's just one word. It starts with an F, and that word is faith. I don't think that most of us in this room have a fear problem. I think that many of us have a faith problem. What faith is going to do is God's faith is going to overwhelm our fears. So the goal in our life is not to have this life that is free of stress and anxiety and worry. That's impossible. If you live on the same planet that I live on, that's not going to be possible. But what is entirely possible is that we believe in a powerful God who is bigger than any of the problems that this world can throw at us. And when we see that God's power is bigger than our problems, we can see where faith can overcome our fears. Now, we're going to look at the question, how then do I trust more? How do I believe better? How do I have more faith? So let's look at Psalm 121. We're going to start with verse 1. This is a song that AJ and the band sang just a little bit ago. It was based off the first 3 verses of Psalm 21. And here the psalmist writes, I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? So a little Hebrew lesson this morning. When they write, I look up to the mountains, it doesn't literally mean like we take our eyes and we look up to the top of the mountain. This is always going to be a metaphor. So how this would, it's a lyrical poem, and like the people would have known, like, okay, what am I going to focus on? As I look at the world, What is it? What is it that I see? Maybe the best way to think about it is like, what am I going to pay attention to? So he says, as I look up to the mountains, here he says, I'm going to focus. I'm going to pay attention. God is going to be the primary imperative of my life. This is the first way that we broaden our belief is, number one, we focus our attention on God. So you woke up this morning, you have full permission to focus on whatever you want to focus on. You can get up and read the sports page. You can get up and read the news. You can focus on your problems. Just a couple thoughts, though. What's the first thing you think about in the morning? What's the last thing you think about at night? When trouble comes your way, what is your mind processing? We can focus on our problems. We can focus on that relationship that's gone a little sideways. We can focus on our financial issues. We can focus on that person at work that's given us trouble. We can focus on issues that our kids are dealing with. It doesn't matter if that kid's 2 years old or if that kid's 42 years old. The problems of our kids can consume us. We can focus on our problems 24 hours a day and you'd probably never get bored. Or what you can do is you can focus on God. What God has done for you in the past and how you've seen God work. What God is currently doing in you and through you. What you believe is going to happen because of all the promises that God has made. Now just think about the possibilities if we could shift. And instead of thinking about our problems, we would first think about a God who is bigger than our problems. For some of us in the room, that would just be a huge paradigm shift for us. You can focus on you can focus on what's in your bank account, what's not in your bank account. You can focus on your body, the good and the bad and the ugly. You can focus on the world. The news makes it possible to do that. You can focus on your house, your office, your school, your sports team, your parents, your kids. You can focus on whatever you want to focus on. Maybe a way to think about this, in our age of distraction, there is so much stuff. It just makes it so difficult for us to lift up our eyes and to look at the mountains and to see God first before we see anything and everything else. So let's do something fun. Take out your cell phone. And I see a few of you not doing it. You have your cell phone with you. I hear it go off all the time. You're not here without your cell phone. Now, we're going to try something really cool for the next 4 weeks. And it's just 4 weeks. It's not going to be until Jesus comes back. What you're going to do every day for the next 4 weeks, if you sign up and agree to do this, is you're going to receive a short devotional. And when I say short, I mean under 160 characters, because that's all our texting program would allow us to do. I've written the first 7. I think the shortest one's 147 characters. The longest couple are 160 characters. But I thought it would be really, and we're going to send this out in the morning. It's not going to be early enough to wake you up unless you sleep in until noon, in which case, get out of bed and wake up anyway. And wouldn't it be really cool if we could lift up our eyes to the mountains and just get this, inspirational, affirming micro devotional that's going to help us to focus and lift up our eyes to the mountains. So go to 313131. That's the number, and then it's all one word. Just text it to Up at Night, and if you do this for 2 or 3 days and you're just tired of wasting so much time on these inspirational thoughts, you can type the word stop and we will stop sending them to you. So I encourage you to do that. So now, next, the psalmist asks, where does my help come from? Now, this is a great question. We find the answer in verse 2, where he says, my help comes from the Lord who made the heaven and the earth. Now, this is why we focus on God, right? So I think there's a lot of us that focus on our financial problems. There's a lot of us that focus on our worries. There's a lot of us that focus on dysfunctional relationships. But our help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and the maker of earth. Y'all can put your phones away now. You don't have to play with them the rest of the service. Unless you're tweeting stuff, then you keep them out. Now, here's the second principle that we get from this. Understand that God is in control and you are not. All right, so who's in control? Who likes to act like we're in control? Yeah, we do. So there's like this disconnect. God is the maker of the heaven and the earth. God is the maker of you. But what happens, and so there's going to be a relationship between fear and control. Like, does anybody know anybody that just likes to be in control? Is anybody sitting by anybody that likes to be in control, and you're pointing at each other and the elbows are getting hurt and ribs are injured? And so do you know what? I mean, here's the behind the scenes stuff of this. Like, when we don't have control, we go into the fear mode. Or when fear, worry, anxiety happens, then we go into the control mode. Now, this is a position that we do not own. God is the maker of the heavens and the earth, and we try to control things, we try to control people, we try to control environments, we try to manipulate people, we try to manipulate things, we try to manipulate environments. Yeah, if this is your plan, like to get rid of worry and fear and anxiety, good luck with that. You're actually just adding like layers of stress, onto your life. What we're trying to do is do something that God did not create us to do. We are lifting our eyes to the entirely wrong thing. So when a problem comes our way, when stress comes our way, when anxiety or worry comes our way, we don't lift our eyes to the mountains. We don't lift our eyes to the heavens. What do? We lift our eyes to our resources. We lift our eyes to our wisdom. We lift our eyes to our skills, our gifts, our education, even our network. And some of these things are cool. They'll get you part of the way, but they won't get you all the way. Because in the end, sometimes there's nobody that can help us except God himself. Now, fear is going to come. Like, here's the genesis of fear, which then is the genesis of control. Fear is going to come when things don't work out or are not working out the way that we want them to. So if our marriage, if our career, if our kids, if our physical health isn't working out the way that we want it to work out, here's where the fear and anxiety and worry come. And when the fear and anxiety and worry come, then we try to control things that are beyond our control. We fail, which only creates more stress and anxiety. So let's go to this one. You guys probably know this verse, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. So I want to tell you what it doesn't say, okay? It doesn't say, I know the plans that you have for you. It doesn't say that. It says, I know the plans that I have for you. So the creator of the heavens and the earth, he has plans for you. Not a specific, general, tight little plan that, pencils you in for the rest of your life. These are general, broad, specific plans. Not for disaster, not to harm you, but to give you like a future and a hope. Those are God's plans for your life, and that's really cool. Now, let's go to verse 3. This is our final verse this morning. Here the psalmist continues. He will not let you stumble. The one who watches over you will not slumber. We're going to slip in life. I mean, that's going to happen. We're going to fall. We're going to stumble. God's not going to let it happen that it's going to be so bad. God always watches out for us. He is always present with us. Mistakes are part of life. Grace can be part of life. Failure is part of life. Mercy can be part of life. Now, the thing we remember here, the third principle this morning, is remember that you need help. And remember that you're not alone. Now, one of the problems, being a preacher to a bunch of 21st century Americans is most of us like to be pretty self-sufficient and do things all by ourselves. I remember one time when Benny was a little kid, I had done something for him, and he was really mad that I did this for him. So he put it back to the way that it was, and then he redid it, and I remember he told me, he says, I did it all by myself. And a lot of us like to do it all by yourself. Well, you can't do life all by yourself. That's not God's plan for our life. God is the watcher, so that makes us the watchee. And if you're anything like me, you need a little bit of supervision sometimes. Now, there's going to be times, in your life, and maybe some of you are going through one of those times now that you just feel that God's not showing up. You know, he says he's never going to slumber, and you feel God's taking at least a cat nap right now, or maybe God's in deep hibernation. There's going to be times when you might think that I don't know if God knows what's going on, or I don't know if God cares what's going on, or, there's going to be times when you might feel abandoned. So what do you do during those times? Well, you do the same thing that I probably do. You go to your hiding spot. Now, when you're a kid, you had a hiding spot. Maybe when the world didn't make sense, you found yourself in the arms of your mom or your dad. Maybe when the kids were unkind to you, you escaped to your treehouse. Maybe when your dad and mom would yell at each other, you would go to your bedroom and put yourself under a blanket that made you feel safe. The disciples, they had the upper room. I had my closet where I could lock the door. But what we've done is we've traded in our old fears for new fears, our old hiding places for new hiding places, and you have a hiding place. You have a hiding place. Maybe for some, we drink a lot of beer or have a lot of whiskey or something like that. Maybe that's a hiding place that just removes you from all the pain for a while. Doesn't work. When the stuff wears off, you still got the same problems and probably bigger problems. Some people may take a lot of pills and it has a similar effect. There's going to be some people that just work a lot, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. It just never shuts off. And you get a lot of affirmation. You get a lot of approval. But even when that stuff wears off, you still got your issues. Some of us hop from relationship to relationship to relationship, seeking the approval of people when it's really the approval of God that we're significantly searching for. Now, these things at best will give us a temporary relief. They will take the edge off. We don't have to think about the problems. We don't have to deal with the fears. Sometimes when I deal with people who are dealing with grief, one of the things that they tell me is, I'm just going to keep so busy that I don't even have time to think about this. Well, here's the problem with that. You can either deal with your grief or your grief can deal with you. So we get so busy so we don't have to think about that stuff, but the grief, it still builds up and piles on. And then we got stress and anxiety and fear at new levels that we've never even experienced before. So the biggest problem, though, that's huge. That's a huge thing, but the biggest problem's not even that. The biggest problem with these hiding places that we've created is in these hiding places, you cannot fulfill your purpose and mission and goals and dreams and biggest callings in life. The disciples were completely safe in their upper rooms, but then Jesus bursted in through the walls and he broke down any worry and shame that they had. And he said, "Peace be with you." It's like this. I have an assignment for all of you 11 people, and it's this, and it does not happen inside of these four walls. You're eventually going to have to unlock the door and emerge into the world that you are going to change. That's going to be the same for you. Your biggest purpose in life, your biggest passion in life, your biggest goals and dreams in life, they are not going to happen in your hiding place. So it's time that you put the bottle down. It's time that you throw the pills away. It's time that we get out of these dysfunctional relationships. It's time that we stop working so much to compensate for all the issues that we're dealing with. Whatever your hiding place is, it's time that we stop, because in our hiding place, we're not thriving, we're surviving. We're not flourishing, we're just going through the motions of life. Now, I'm going to give you the best thing that you're going to hear this morning. It's not from me, it's just straight from the Bible. So let's go to Psalm chapter 32, verse 7. And here's our true hiding place. Here's our true home. It's not a closet. It's not a room. It's not a substance. It's not affirmation or approval. For you, God, are my hiding place. You protect me from trouble. You surround me with songs of victory. Like the songs of victory, these guys, you know what they did? This is crazy. 9 of them died for the sake of the gospel. They got courage that they never thought that they would get. Now, a couple thousand years later, at once there was less than a dozen of them. Today, there's 2.25 billion of us. This is a movement that they started. Now, what's really cool in this one is if I were to go back to John chapter 20, Jesus came back 3 verses later. He came back 7 days later, and guess where the disciples were? They were still in their hiding place. They hadn't moved. They were afraid. This right there is going to teach us that courage is not an event. Courage is a process. So I wouldn't expect that you're going to leave this place this morning a little bit and you're going to say, okay, well, all that fear and worry and anxiety, that stuff's behind me. I'm doing the courage thing. No, this is a process. It can start today. You can have a great big booster shot in the arm today. But it's a process. It took these guys years to pull this thing off. Now, just as courage came to them, I want you to know that courage can come to you. Your hiding place does not have to be and should not be your final destination. God's dreams, God's plans, God's desires for you are not in the hiding place. They're in the world. So we're going to pray right now, and we're going to do it different than what we usually do. I want you just to look up at me, look around at each other. As the band comes up, they're going to sing a song, and it's going to relate to one of the things I'm going to talk about here. And the first thing I want you to know, if you came here this morning with some fear in your life, I want you to know you are not alone. You aren't one of a few. You are one of all of us. If your kids are causing you some anxiety or worry, if there's some money problems, if you're worried about your future, if there's a relational thing going on, if there's something that's keeping you up at night, I want you just to hear 2 things. Number one, and in a few moments you're going to hear a song and it talks about this. And as they sing the song, I just want you to listen to these words and embrace them. And number one is that you're not alone. You are not alone. There is never a time in your life that God isn't with you. Never. We think the world can overcome it. The world cannot overcome us because God has already come. He's already overcome the world. The Bible tells us to draw near to God, and God will draw near to us. Know that, regardless of what happens, God is still in control. God has spent God's entire history, picking up the pieces and making beautiful things. And you're not the exception, you're the rule. God will do that to all of us. And the second thing, the final thing is, if this is you, if you come with some fear, anxiety, worry, shame, guilt, whatever, the thing I want you to do is run to your hiding place. Not the closet, not the upper room, not the pills, not the job, not the affirmation. I want you to run to your hiding place. Run to Jesus, the one who never sleeps, the one who never slumbers, the one who tells us that we cannot fulfill his destiny for us inside the confines of our hiding place, but we emerge from our hiding place to go into the world and to change the world.